The overhead lights in the ER flickered slightly as I stood frozen beside my grandfather's bed, the antiseptic smell burning my nose. The treatment will cost over $100,000, the doctor said without flinching, and the chance of recovery is less than 15%. My heart thudded in my chest as I looked to the people I once called family, waiting for someone to say something, anything. But there was only silence. My mother Deborah looked at my Uncle Mark, who sighed and crossed his arms. My cousin Vanessa rolled her eyes, checking her phone like she was bored at a dentist appointment. Then my mother finally broke the quiet with a voice as cold as steel. "Let him go. He's lived long enough. We're not throwing money into a grave." That was it. No tears, no questions, no discussion. They turned and walked away. I watched them disappear down the hallway, heels clicking, not one of them looking back. I was 18, broke and terrified, but I didn't move. I stood rooted to the spot, staring at the old man who raised me when they couldn't be bothered. Grandpa Harold wasn't just some dying man. He was the only one who ever believed I mattered. When I was 5 and scared of the dark, he sat with me until I slept. When I was 11 and failed math, he taught me how to build circuits so I could see numbers differently. When I was 16 and my mother said I was a waste of space, he told me I could be anything. And now, at the edge of his life, he was alone except for me. A nurse approached quietly. "Are you Elena Brooks?" I knotted my throat too tight to speak. "We'll need someone to take financial responsibility for his care. The insurance will only cover a portion. Without intervention, he may not make it through the week." My hands trembled. My savings were meant for college. My future. But how could I walk away? How could I leave him like they did? I didn't hesitate. Not because I wasn't scared. I was terrified. But because I refused to let him die thinking no one cared. I signed every form they handed me, each signature pulling me deeper into debt, but also anchoring me to something stronger than fear. Commitment. Love. After I signed the last document, I walked down to the hospital's human resources office and begged for work. Any work. Mopping floors, cleaning bathrooms, anything. By 6 in the evening, I had a name badge and a mop. By 10, I was sitting next to Grandpa again, whispering to him while machines beeped steadily. He didn't wake up the first night, or the second, or the third. But I was there, holding his hand, reading from the old mystery novel he loved, sleeping in a chair with a thin blanket and a broken zipper. The 4th day, just before dawn, his hand moved slightly. I opened my eyes, thinking I imagined it, but then his fingers tightened just enough to make me gasp. His voice was dry and faint. "You stayed." My tears came fast and uncontrollable. I pressed my forehead against his hand and whispered back, "Always." That moment, quiet, barely audible, became the beginning of something no one could have predicted. They thought they left us with death, but what they really left behind was something stronger. A beginning, a bond, and the first seed of the legacy they'd never be part of. I did not leave that hospital for 3 straight days. I washed floors during the night and studied bills during the day. I learned how to navigate the insurance system, how to advocate for someone in a coma, and how to sign legal documents that made me the sole financial caretaker of a man everyone else had abandoned. When Grandpa finally opened his eyes and whispered that I had stayed, something shifted deep inside me. It was more than relief. It was the certainty that my decision, however reckless or naive, had been the right one. I helped him sip water through a straw, whispered every detail of the last 3 days into his ear, and promised that I would not let him go. The doctors were skeptical. They kept repeating phrases like statistically unlikely and improbable turnaround. But I did not care about statistics. I cared about the look in his eyes when he realized he was not alone. As his condition stabilized, I started sleeping less and doing more. I worked double shifts and memorized his prescriptions, helped nurses adjust his machines, and even learned how to replace a clogged IV. I became part janitor, part advocate, part medical assistant, all while trying to survive. We could not go home. So I rented a small studio apartment 3 blocks from the hospital, the kind where the radiator hisses through the night and you share a bathroom with strangers. It was all I could afford. Grandpa came home 2 weeks later in a wheelchair, still weak but alert. That first night, he sat beside me on a creaky futon and took my hand. "You gave me back time," he said. I won't waste it. Every evening after I finished work, he began teaching me not just how to fix broken light switches or rewire table fans. He taught me how to think, how to troubleshoot, how to look at a problem and understand its pattern. Most people panic when something breaks, he told me one night, handing me a soldering iron, but panic does not fix anything. Understanding does. Our apartment became a laboratory of sorts. We fixed toasters for neighbors, rebuilt coffee makers, and even created a homemade circuit tester using spare parts from the hospital's disposal bin. Word began to spread. People knocked on our door asking if we could look at their radios, old phones, broken blenders. Grandpa never asked for money, but I started keeping a shoebox labeled Repair Fund. I added small amounts each time someone offered a tip. I refused to let us go hungry again. I balanced online GED prep classes with my hospital job and the never-ending repairs we took in from strangers. Sleep became a luxury I could not afford. One night, after successfully repairing a neighbor's ancient television, Grandpa looked at me with pride and said, "You know, Elena, you have the mind of an engineer." I laughed at the time, wiping grease from my cheek. I have the mind of a janitor who got lucky with wires, but I carried his words with me, tucked them away like armor. He saw something in me I had never allowed myself to believe. Slowly, I stopped looking at myself through the lens of failure. The scars from being left behind did not disappear, but they faded beneath layers of knowledge, experience, and quiet victories. I started designing small tools to help Grandpa move around the apartment more easily. I created a voice alert system that notified me if he needed help. We began sketching an idea for a simple fall detector, something wearable, easy to build, and affordable. "Call it Drop Safe," he said one night. "Simple and safe, like you." I wrote that name in permanent marker across the prototype casing. Drop Safe became our project, our obsession. He pretended to fall over a dozen times in one afternoon just to help me test it. It was clunky at first, but it worked. We laughed more in those moments than we had in years. It was not perfect, but it was ours. What started as survival was quietly becoming innovation. And for the first time, I began to feel like the future might be mine to build. Life in that cramped apartment was far from easy, but it became a place of learning and rebirth. By day, I cleaned hospital floors and sorted supply closets. By night, I studied engineering principles online, applied trial and error to our drop-safe design, and soldered wires over a chipped coffee table under a flickering light bulb. Grandpa sat nearby, offering advice testing circuits and making jokes that only someone with 90 years of life could deliver with such timing. We did not have much, but we had momentum. Word spread around the neighborhood about the girl who could fix anything and the old man who spoke like a philosopher. By the third month, we had a small waiting list of requests. People brought in vacuum cleaners, fans, broken lamps, even a broken wheelchair lift. We never advertised, we did not charge much, but people kept coming. One evening, while I rewired a neighbor's busted irrigation timer, Grandpa said something I would never forget. "You do not need their name to build your own." I paused, confused, and asked, "Whose name?" He just smiled and twisted the wires in his hands. It was in that moment I realized he was preparing me for more than just a life of repairs. He was building me to stand alone, to rise beyond the identity they tried to force on me. That year, I earned my GED. Itchy. I walked alone to the testing center with a sandwich in my bag and Grandpa's hand on my shoulder from memory. I passed every subject with distinction. I nearly cried when I saw the final scores. I applied for a local part-time tech program designed for women in STEM fields. At first, I hovered over the submit button, convinced I was not good enough. Then I remembered his voice, the words he used to say when I was too scared to try. The people who belong are not the ones born into rooms. They are the ones who build doors. I pressed submit. I got accepted. Around the same time, we pitched the DropSafe prototype to a clinic that worked with elderly patients. They liked the simplicity. They loved the price. They offered a small grant to refine the design. It was the first check I ever received that came from an idea born entirely from pain and transformed by love. We reinvested every cent into the project. We got help from 2 college interns who believed in what we were doing. They worked out of our living room in exchange for coffee and inspiration. DropSafe became more than a project. It became a movement, a symbol of how love can rewire fate. By the second year, we were incorporated as an LLC. By the third, we had a small office space and a few part-time employees. Grandpa became our chief tester and spokesperson. We filmed videos of him demonstrating how the device worked. He looked straight into the camera and said, "This thing gave me dignity. That's why we built it." By the fifth year, our device was being used by over 20,000 seniors across 3 states. We did not chase investors. We grew slow but steady like Grandpa said things should. One day, a local paper ran a story titled, "From Janitor to CEO." I smiled at the headline but did not send it to my family. I did not need to. The article spread like wildfire. Friends of friends, distant cousins, even former neighbors who once called me a lost cause all saw it. I received emails from people I had not heard from in years. One cousin wrote, "Hey, long time, wow, you're doing amazing." I deleted it without replying, because the truth was I had nothing to say to them. My name was no longer tethered to theirs. My worth was not up for their reevaluation. My success did not need their applause. Every night I still returned to that same apartment, still climbed the same narrow stairs, still sat across from the man who saved my life by simply staying. He watched every pitch video, reviewed every design sketch, gave me feedback both blunt and loving. Sometimes he said nothing at all, just nodded with that same proud smile. One evening he said something that stayed with me forever. "Success means nothing if it makes you forget who you are." Those words were still echoing in my mind when the silence came. He was 91 when his health started declining again. This time, it was gentler. He still drank his morning coffee, still teased me about my messy work desk, still offered insights on designs. But I knew, and he knew. This time he would not recover. And I, who had stayed strong for so long, found myself unable to let go. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The light coming through the window was soft, almost respectful. I found Grandpa in his favorite chair by the window, the one he called his thinking spot. A book rested in his lap, closed. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the table beside him, and a faint smile still lingered on his face. No machines, no hospital, just peace. I held his hand for a long time before calling the hospice nurse. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I wasn't ready to exist in a world where his voice no longer filled my apartment. We buried him quietly as he had wanted. No elaborate flowers, no big speeches. Just the people who truly mattered, a few of our earliest customers. The clinic director who gave us our first chance. The barista who always gave him free biscotti, and the nurse who once said he was the kindest patient she'd ever had. I stood outside the chapel thanking guests, holding back tears. And then I heard them. The click of expensive heels against gravel. I turned, and there they were. My mother Deborah in a tailored black coat, my Uncle Mark with his permanent scowl, and Vanessa dressed like she was heading to a stockholder meeting. They scanned the scene like tourists at someone else's grief. My mother stepped forward with a warm facade that cracked the air. "Elena, my God, look at you. You've grown into such a woman." I didn't move, didn't speak. She tried again. "I know things were complicated, but we're still family. Grandpa would have wanted us to stand together today." I wanted to laugh to scream to ask if she remembered walking away from him like he was an empty chair in a waiting room, but I didn't. I just nodded toward the chapel. "He's inside. You have 5 minutes." After the service, as I folded programs and donation slips for our new elder care grant, my mother approached again that same brittle smile from every forced birthday dinner she used to host. "So, about the estate," she said with forced lightness. "We assume there's a will." Grandpa was never careless. I met her eyes blank and steady. "There is." Her smile widened like a net. "Wonderful. We'll need to sit down and discuss how things will be divided." I stood still, hands calm, voice low. "You left him to die, Mom. You didn't call. You didn't visit. You didn't even ask if he survived. You're not here to mourn. You're here for what you think he left behind." She blinked once, then recovered. "Don't be dramatic. We're his children. He wouldn't cut us out. He loved us." I looked down at the sealed wooden envelope in my hands, the one Grandpa had given me weeks before. "You'll find out tomorrow," I said. "But know this. He wasn't nearly as forgiving as I am. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, but she said nothing more. The next morning, I arrived 15 minutes early to the office of Mr. Langford Grandpa's longtime attorney, the same man who helped us file DropSafe's first legal documents. The office smelled like old paper and polished wood. On the table sat a sealed envelope and a small wooden box. I sat at the head of the table silent. Then they arrived. My mother led the way, heels echoing down the hallway like a war march. My uncle looked smug. My cousin smirked like he'd already planned the vacation he'd take with his share. No one said hello. Mr. Langford cleared his throat. "This is the last will and testament of Harold Brooks." He turned to me. "Elena, would you please open the box?" I lifted the lid. Inside was Grandpa's old pocket watch, a flash drive, and a folded note. I slid the drive toward Mr. Langford. He plugged it in. The screen lit up, and there he was. Grandpa in a worn cardigan looking straight into the camera. His voice filled the room. "If you're watching this, I've already left this world, and if the people I think are in this room showed up, I'm not surprised." He continued speaking with a calm tone that made the air in the room feel heavier. "Let me make this simple. I, Harold Brooks, leave the entirety of my estate, including my shares in DropSafe, all real estate assets, personal savings accounts, patents, and intellectual property to my granddaughter Elena Brooks. Everything!" My uncle let out an audible gasp. My mother leaned forward, her smile dissolving into disbelief. My cousin's smirk vanished. "This is outrageous," my mother snapped. "He must have been manipulated. She was with him every day. Who knows what she convinced him of?" Mr. Langford raised a hand and held up a notarized document. "Mr. Brooks underwent a full cognitive evaluation 2 weeks before this recording. His mental capacity was confirmed by 2 independent specialists. There was no coercion. This will is legally binding." My cousin shot up from his chair. She was a janitor. She mooched off him for years. She took advantage of him. As if he had heard every word in real time, Grandpa's voice continued from the screen. "To those who say she took from me, I say she gave me 7 more years. She gave me mornings with sunlight and fresh coffee. She gave me purpose. You gave me silence. You walked away. She stayed. She built something not just for me, but for others. She turned pain into possibility." My mother's face turned white. My uncle gripped the edge of the table. Mr. Langford closed the laptop and placed his hands together calmly. "There are no alternate beneficiaries. The will includes a no contest clause. Any legal challenge to its contents will result in the forfeiture of any claims to the estate. Harold Brooks's wishes are absolute. Elena Brooks is the sole heir." Silence followed. Not the kind that comes from confusion, but the kind that erupts when illusions collapse. My mother looked at me for the first time with something resembling fear. But I said nothing. I did not gloat. I did not smirk. I simply breathed, because this was not about winning. It was about truth. They stood slowly. My cousin kicked his chair as he walked out. My uncle muttered something under his breath. My mother lingered. "You think this makes you better than us," she hissed. "You think a video and a few signatures erase our place." I stared at her. This woman who once told me I was throwing my life away. This woman who abandoned her father in a hospital hallway without a single backward glance. You left him. You left both of us. And for 7 years, you never once called to see if he even survived. My uncle stepped closer, voice rising. "We are his children, Elena. You can't erase that with a USB stick." I turned to him. "And what did being his child mean to you?" "A right to a bank account, a shortcut to a future you didn't earn. You gave him nothing. I gave him everything I had, including time you deemed worthless." He clenched his fists like the words wounded more than any punch. My cousin spun around. "We'll take this public. We'll tell every reporter that you manipulated a dying man with dementia." I nodded slowly. "Go ahead. And I will release every medical record, every signed document, and every one of his handwritten journals. I will post every entry where he wrote about how it felt to be left alone and how he rebuilt a life with me. Let the world see what kind of family you really were." The air changed. Threats fell silent, but I was not done. I reached into my bag and pulled out one last envelope. "He wrote this for you," I said, handing it to my mother. "It's not legal. It's personal." She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were 3 words written in Grandpa's clear and steady handwriting. "You walked away." Her hands shook. She crumpled the letter like it could undo the truth, but the truth had already bloomed across the room. For the first time, she did not speak. No insult, no excuse, just silence. I turned to leave. At the doorway, I paused. "You lost the inheritance," I said without turning. "But worse, you lost him. And you lost him long before he died. I didn't steal anything. You gave it away when you chose comfort over love." I stepped into the sunlight outside, feeling its warmth like a new skin. Behind me, they stood in shadow, and for the first time in my life, I did not shrink beneath their gaze. I stood tall. I walked steady, because I was not the girl they abandoned. I was the woman he chose. They did not leave quietly. The moment the glass doors of the law office closed behind us, my mother stormed toward me with venom in her eyes. "You think this makes you better than us, Elena? You think all this money and legal drama turns you into someone important. You manipulated a sick old man. You tricked him when he was vulnerable." I stood my ground, not flinching. "You don't get to rewrite history, Mom. You walked out of that hospital without looking back. You left a dying man alone, and you left me, too. For 7 years, you said nothing. No call, no letter, not even a message asking if he made it." My uncle stepped in tone condescending and forceful. "This is emotional. You're just upset. We're his family. That doesn't change. Blood is blood." I looked him dead in the eye. "And what exactly did that blood mean to you? A shortcut to his bank account, a guaranteed payday because you didn't show up for birthdays or holidays, or even when he was fighting to breathe. You never visited. You never cared." My cousin scoffed. "So what, Elena? You were just his nurse. You wiped his drool and mopped his floor. You lived off him. You built your little company using his savings." I smiled, not because I was amused, but because I had waited 7 years to say what came next. "I built DropSafe with no loans, no investors, and no help from any of you. Every dollar we earned came from Repaired Toasters community donations and small grants we applied for ourselves. And I lived with him, yes, because he wanted me there. Because we were family long after you stopped being one." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "We'll challenge this. You don't scare us." I leaned in just slightly, my voice low but clear. "Try it, and I'll publish everything. The video recordings, the letters, the notes he wrote about how abandoned he felt. The ones where he wrote about you, Vanessa, and how you laughed when he forgot your birthday. The ones where he asked why his own daughter never even sent him a card." Their faces twisted. Rage, denial, shame. But none of it landed on me. For once, I was not the one trembling. My mother took a step back, her face pale, her hands clenched. "You're cruel," she whispered. "Just like your father." I tilted my head. "No, I'm not cruel. I'm just done pretending you care. Because if you had even for a second, you wouldn't have shown up now like vultures circling a legacy you didn't help build. And I am not sorry that he saw through you. I'm proud that he did." Mark snarled. "You can't erase us. We'll always be Brooks." I smiled softly. "Then carry the name, but know what it stands for now. Not inheritance, not money, but failure to love when it mattered. The worst part. You did not just lose a fortune. You lost a man who would have forgiven you, a man who waited for 7 years." My voice cracked slightly, but I held it steady. "And you never came. You left him to die. And when he lived, you stayed gone. That's the truth. Nothing you say can change it." Vanessa looked like she wanted to spit, but none of them spoke again. They turned and walked away, this time slower, without the confidence they carried when they thought they would win. I watched them leave, their silhouettes small against the sunlight, and I felt nothing, no anger, no grief, only finality. It was done. The battle they thought they came to win had never been about money. It was about memory, And they lost the moment they walked out that hospital door. I stood there until they disappeared down the street. Then I turned, walked to my car, and drove home. Not to a mansion or a tower, but to the small apartment where love had once rebuilt a man's life. Where I had learned what real inheritance was. Not gold, not land, but strength, kindness, dignity, and the unshakable knowledge that I had stayed when no one else did. The apartment was quieter than ever. Grandpa's chair still sat by the window, and I hadn't moved the old kettle he loved. His favorite mug was clean on the counter, and the pocket watch rested on the shelf above my bed, wound every morning at 7, like a ritual, like a vow I wasn't ready to break. But I didn't sit in sorrow. I sat in intention. I didn't want to preserve the past. I wanted to build from it. 2 weeks after the reading of the will, I filed the paperwork to establish the Brooks Foundation. Not just a name, but a mission. A place where teens like me and elders like Grandpa could find something more than survival. A path, a future, a reason to believe in themselves again. I used a portion of the inheritance to rent a small room in the community center 5 blocks away. 3 laptops, 2 folding tables, a whiteboard with a broken wheel. That was all we had to start, and that was enough. I started teaching young girls how to wire basic circuits. I brought in old printers and lamps and let the kids figure out how to make them work again. At first, they didn't believe they could. They had been told too many times that they weren't good enough. I knew that feeling. I remembered it every time I looked in the mirror, but slowly they started to see something different in themselves. One day, a 13-year-old named Sophia connected a circuit for a DIY fall detector. The light blinked. The alarm chirped. "It actually works!" she shouted, eyes wide with disbelief. I felt something shift in my chest. That spark, that wonder, that was Grandpa living on. Each kid who walked through the door found something they didn't know they were missing. Confidence, curiosity, community. I gave out toolkits and tiny grants for home projects. I brought in retired engineers to mentor them. One girl rebuilt her grandmother's broken mobility scooter. Another created a home alarm system using only recycled wires. They were no longer fixing machines, they were fixing themselves. 5 years later, one of our scholarship recipients became a lead developer at DropSafe. She invited me to her college graduation and stood on that stage with her chin high and her hands steady. "I never had a real family," she whispered, hugging me after the ceremony. "But your foundation made me feel like I mattered." I gave her Grandpa's favorite wrench, the one he always said could fix more than circuits. "You do matter," I told her, "and don't ever let anyone make you forget that." The Brooks Foundation grew. We moved into a bigger space. We started programs for elderly folks who had been abandoned by their families. I hired social workers, counselors, and outreach staff. We built workshops where elders taught teens how to fix radios and teens taught elders how to set up email. Mutual repair. Mutual respect. We didn't have a fancy headquarters or a corporate budget, but we had purpose. Every success came with a memory, every challenge came with a lesson, and every smile came with echoes of Grandpa's voice saying, "This is what matters." I still lived in the same apartment. I didn't want to move. It held too many beginnings. The walls weren't new, but they remembered. The floor creaked in places he once walked. The air still smelled like solder and hope. DropSafe had grown beyond anything we dreamed. We had state contracts, new models, and real engineers on payroll. But I still kept his old desk in my office. Still kept the first broken prototype in a frame. Not because they were perfect, but because they were ours. One night, I stood by the window holding the pocket watch and thought about the day I signed those hospital forms. How scared I'd been. How alone. And how that moment turned into everything that followed. I stayed. I fought. I built. And now the silence wasn't empty. It was full of meaning, full of lives touched, full of memories restored, and full of the kind of wealth no one could steal, no matter how hard they tried. Because real inheritance isn't something you're given. It's something you earn, something you protect, something you pass forward. And that was exactly what I planned to do. The years passed, but I never stopped winding that pocket watch. Every morning at exactly 7, just like he used to, I turned the crown with careful hands. Not because I was clinging to the past, but because it reminded me that time when used with love becomes legacy. The foundation expanded to 2 more cities. We partnered with schools' elder care centers and juvenile programs. We created mobile repair vans to visit shut-ins and teens in underserved areas. One van was named Harold's Fix-It Bus and painted bright blue. The day it first rolled onto a quiet street and a kid ran up holding a broken fan, I knew we were doing exactly what he would have wanted. The work consumed me, but in a good way. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about empowering them to save themselves. We didn't just fix electronics. We rebuilt people, rewired the belief systems that had been broken by neglect or shame. Every graduation from our tech apprenticeships felt like a personal victory. Every elderly person who stopped crying and started teaching again felt like a miracle. One of our earliest elder members, a retired mechanic named Luis, told me he hadn't smiled in 10 years until he watched a 13-year-old fix a broken coffee grinder. He ended up marrying one of our senior volunteers. They baked cookies every Thursday for the teens. That's what love creates. That's what staying creates. I had many opportunities to leave the apartment, to move into a better neighborhood, to live the kind of life people think you deserve after success. But I stayed. Not because I had to, but because the roots of everything meaningful in my life had grown from that very place. Sometimes I would sit in Grandpa's old chair, now reupholstered with the morning sun pouring in, and just breathe. Let the silence hold me. It no longer frightened me. It comforted me. One evening, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the state senate informing me I had been nominated for a Civic Innovation Award. The nomination came from one of our former students, now a high school teacher. She had written Elena Brooks gave me tools not just for work, but for life. She believed I could build a future even when no one else did. I cried reading it. Not out of pride, but out of gratitude, because everything I had given had once been given to me in that small apartment, in that hospital hallway, in those nights filled with fear and flickering light, because he stayed, and because I stayed. The award ceremony came and went. I didn't tell the press much. I didn't pose for glossy magazine spreads, but I took one photo at the event holding Grandpa's pocket watch. It was the only accessory I wore that night. It was the only one that mattered. A week later, I stood before a new group of students at the foundation, most of them unsure, guarded, skeptical. I held up a small rusted radio and asked who wanted to try fixing it. One girl raised her hand. Her fingers shook a little. I handed it to her along with a tiny screwdriver and said, "You're not here to prove anything. You're here to explore. Mistakes are allowed. Silence is allowed. You get to grow at your pace." Her eyes widened like no one had ever told her that before. After the session, I walked back to my desk and opened the drawer. Inside was the pocket watch. I held it in my hand and felt the weight of it again. Not just metal and gears, but decades of choice and courage. That night I wrote a letter, not to my mother or my uncle or anyone from that broken branch of the tree. I wrote to the foundation's next director, because I knew someday someone else would carry this forward. I included Grandpa's favorite phrase, "You stayed, you built, and now it's yours." 6 months later, I finally packed a small box with items I wanted to pass on. The soldering iron, his wrench, the first drop-safe prototype, and the pocket watch now perfectly polished. I placed it all in a velvet-lined case and sealed it with a note. For the one who believes that legacy is built in silence and love, when the time is right, you'll know. I left the box in our foundation's archive room. I didn't tell anyone, but I knew someone would find it when they were ready, just like I had found purpose when I was ready. That's how legacy works. It waits quietly until it's needed, and then it shines. The seasons turned, the programs grew, and the faces changed, but the essence of what we built remained the same. Each person who walked through the doors of the Brooks Foundation carried with them a history they thought no one would ever honor. Here, that history became the blueprint for their transformation. I saw a boy who had been expelled for fighting learn to build a solar-powered lamp and donate it to a local shelter. I watched an elderly woman who had not spoken since her husband died start teaching classes on analog radio repair and laughing like a child. The broken became the builders. The forgotten became the foundation. And through it all, I still lived simply. No designer clothes, no fast cars. I walked to work. I used the same chipped mug Grandpa once used. I brewed tea every morning at 6:30, then wound the watch at 7. I never forgot where it all began. One crisp autumn evening, I stood in the quiet workshop watching a girl about the same age I had been when my family walked away from me. She was focused, steady, connecting wires to a motion sensor module. She looked up and smiled when the light blinked. I walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "That works," I said. She nodded proudly. "I didn't think I could do it," she whispered. "Nobody at school thought I could either." I sat beside her and took a slow breath. "Let me tell you a secret," I said. "People will always underestimate those who care deeply. But what they don't realize is that people like you and me, the ones who stay when it's hard, we're the ones who end up changing everything." She blinked back tears, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a small notebook. She showed me sketches, ideas, dreams. I saw myself in her, that quiet fire, that determination masked by doubt. I knew then that the watch would go to her someday, but not yet, not until she had built something of her own, because the watch, like the legacy it carried, could only belong to someone who understood what it meant to stay. Months passed, then years. DropSafe expanded internationally. We licensed new versions of our technology. The foundation opened 2 residential programs for abandoned teens with technical aptitude. The staff grew to 50. Our stories were told in magazines, online platforms, even a documentary that aired on national television. I gave every interview the same way. Humble, focused on the mission. I didn't want fame. I wanted replication. If 10 more places like ours opened, that would be the real award. One day, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. I opened it and recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Vanessa. A short note. No apology, no warmth. Just this: "We were wrong. I don't expect anything, but I wanted to say it." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. I didn't respond, not because I hated her, but because I didn't need her validation. That was the freedom they would never understand. I had let go of needing their acknowledgement years ago, and in doing so, I became more than they ever imagined. I became what Grandpa always saw in me: a builder, a teacher, a force. On the 10th anniversary of his passing, I held a community event in his honor. We called it Fix Forward. Over 300 people came. Some were from the early days, some I had never met. Everyone brought something broken: radios, fans, phones, hopes, and together we repaired them all. That night, as the final guest left and the lights dimmed, I stood alone in the center of the workshop. I walked to the shelf where the watch rested. I wound it one more time, not because I needed to hear it tick, but because I wanted to honor the man who taught me that time is not something to spend. It's something to give. The watch ticked steadily in my hand, and I knew it was time to pass it on.